Ever since we've seen the results of the 2024 elections, they're not completely done, but we're pretty close to understanding exactly where we're at with respect to the elections. I've been just scouring the internet, looking every place I can, and especially looking at the reactions from the Democrats, because when you lose an election, it's a time for deep self-reflection, and I think there is starting to be pretty deep self-reflection on the side of people who are in the Democratic Party and trying to see exactly what is being said and how various different online areas created places for people of like mind to come together and talk about things. And I think one place that I've been looking and that I have frequented in times past, but ever since X has gotten a lot better, I tend to not spend as much time on Reddit anymore, but looking at Reddit and how Reddit has started to identify that they have been sitting in an echo chamber. Lucas, I know you've been looking at some of the election reactions, and we've got a lot of ground to cover here, but yeah, your initial thoughts on election reactions. And I know there's another big movement that's happened, which is 4B as well.
Well, I also have been very interested in the takeaways from Democrats and Republicans, from supporters of third parties, Jill Stein, libertarians, and but I have not seen 4B, and you've piqued my curiosity. Before we maybe start to parse some of some of the threats or assumptions made by the incoming administration or the outgoing administration, what is this 4B movement? What does 4B stand for?
So this is liberal women have decided that they are not going to have sex with men until men respect them and like it's not entirely clear because I'm not as plugged into this movement, but I'm as you start to see it's I think very much dovetailing onto something that started in South Korea, where there were started to be some laws that were passed that were strongly reacted to by women in South Korea. And so essentially they just said, you know what, we're just going to stop having sex with men. We're just not going to do this anymore because like it's just too hostile. We don't like what's happening. And so this is going to be the way that we're going to, at a grassroots level, just try to exercise the power that we have. And this same sort of an idea has been latched onto in America. And essentially, it's saying, hey, look, if you're not going to respect our rights to choose what we want to do with our bodies, then we're just going to stop associating with men 100%, period, full stop.
Okay, well, drawing some eye rolls from me. It sounds like Proud Boys. What we got Proud Girls now, and I hear their pain, but this is, we've also had these sort of movements in the past that express themselves in new religious fervor of new millennialism and prudery. I think it's well, one, I think it comes from putting too many expectations in the legislative process, and this is one thing that I'm always very interested in at the time of our elections, because we pour so much attention and care into, get out the vote, get out the vote, get out the vote. Well, the legislative process and legislatures who are elected have much less power than we assume. And not only that, but whenever we make assumptions that especially the federal government has all of these powers, we lose the beauty of the nuance in setting different levels of government against each other to protect the rights of citizens and to protect our liberty. And we have long ignored the powers of states, the actual powers that are granted to states in their constitutions, and the limits of powers that are placed in the federal constitution. So, uh, it's interesting to me that we have so many disagreements about the autonomy of our bodies, and whenever we're arguing about whether the federal government has say over our bodies, or whether we ourselves do, we're everyone's wrong. The states are given power and jurisdiction over our bodies. That's called the writ of habeas corpus, and we may disagree as to what their expectations are for us in participating, and how much work or rewards that we take from government. But to lay at the feet of national politicians the expectation to fix or change this is puts us in a cycle of frustration. Why is it 4B? I don't get I don't get the association between 4B and this reoccurring uh, uh, prudent movement of prudence that we have.
Well, I've got a slightly different take on what's happening here, and I'm actually encouraged by this, honestly. Anytime I see people claiming power and at a very grassroots or decentralized or flattened power base, that to me is always encouraging. So if women are saying, you know what, I have power and my power is to do X and I'm going to do it and I'm going to exercise this, first having the idea and then exercising it through intention and then carrying it out and following through on it. I think it's the last part that's always the hardest. It's easy to have an idea, it's easy to say something, but the execution of something is always much more difficult than having an idea. You can have the idea that you're going to, fly to the moon, but the execution of doing that and actually following through on it and achieving it is far different than like having the idea. So to the effect that people would say, I'm going to take power. I'm going to take power over my situation and I'm going to do something different. And that different thing that I'm going to do is then going to be expressed in the world. That's a powerful thing. It's a powerful thing for any group of people to do. I think the first place that this comes into play within the scope of politics is oftentimes through running for any kind of an office and just putting yourself out there and saying, I want to be the person that gets to have this aggregation of power that comes through a democratic institution like our constitutional republic or any other place where the people have the ability to rise up. And to the extent that these things are taken away from people, that you don't have the ability to express your own power to like affect change within the world at some either very local level or even on a grander stage, it gives power to those who already have it. And I think I've seen this in my own life in where I've been involved in politics, and I've seen grassroots associations come together. I've seen people organize themselves together and try to get things done and realize that there are multifacets to power that are required to be able to really affect change in the world. And it's not just people power, but it's also money power. It's the power you have to be able to affect change around you. And so I'm encouraged by this as long as it's got a strong follow through. Like just complaining on social media is not enough, but you have to actually do it. And I don't know how much any one individual really affects the world in something like this, but if it's widespread and it's very big, then it can start to have an effect on how people perceive the world. So I'm somewhat encouraged about that. I'll have to look up a little bit about like why it's being touted as this thing, these two letters in this particular order. I'm kind of curious about that myself. Rusty, I don't
Well,
know. Maybe you heard something about it.
not too much just the reason of the naming for it, but I kind of get into, the eye rolling that like Lucas was getting into when I've seen it, especially at the timing of it. I mean, there was a lot of women that voted for Republican, and, just because, you're a Democrat woman doesn't mean you have less rights than a Republican woman. And the fact that they're just spotlighting it now because, oh, we couldn't allow a black woman to be president, and that's the only reason is so many men came out fighting against it, and now we're going to rebel and hide our bodies away and latch onto this other movement. And it seems to be the left side that's really latching onto it a lot and making all these TikTok videos where, they're showing at the most extremes that not only you're supposed to be abstinent from men, but you're supposed to shave your head and try to, go away from, I don't know if they're trying to just like say, I don't want to be pretty anymore, or like, or trying to latch onto another movement. Cause, most people, when they think of women, they think of longer hair, or at least I do. I don't know if that's another stigma. That's just me being a bad person. But, I think that it's really, one of the things that I've seen that I like about it is you look on the other side and there's a lot of the Republican females that are like trying to counteract the videos and saying, that this just gonna, keep abortion rates low because all the crazy people that are just gonna go get pregnant and have an abortion are no longer gonna be doing that.
Well, there's our answer on why it's 4B, because this is what we had mentioned. It's rooted in the South Korean thing. There's 4 words that all start with BI. So there you go. That's your answer, Lucas.
Okay, so I this is also calling to mind this calls to mind the the prohibition and suffrage movements that we've also had in the past. And I am all for decentralized power, for local and autonomous power. I'm just very wary of when our expectations for seizing power locally are to rely on a centralized authority like the federal government, like the Department of Justice, like these notions of rights, who if they're God-given rights, who is God and how does God enforce them? If they're natural rights or they are granted by a piece of paper, who is enforcing those rights? And so it's one thing to say that you're seizing power, but if you're seizing power through a political instrument that is centralized and you're not backing that up, then is it really seizing power?
I,
And
I,
and I
th- I yeah, I think it comes the other way, and I think that this is one of the things that the Democrats were caught off guard by, because because power flows as a manifestation of like what's going on, right? I mean, you have all the people who have essentially voted a certain way, and it manifests upwards rather than the other way around. And I think what the Democrats have been doing is to try to do it from a top-down fashion. You've got super delegates who are controlling the primary process. The primary process has largely been captured. I mean, Bobby Kennedy said this famously within this cycle. I mean, look, he tried to run as a Democrat. He wanted to. He said, I'm going to participate in the primary. I'm going to do it. And found that there was an absolute non process. Like, it did not exist. He could not run as a Democrat, even though that's where he started. That's where he wanted to do. And he said that this doesn't exist. Like, this isn't my party. I have found this to be a completely controlled thing, and there's no ability for a candidate to even run. And we saw that exact same thing happen with Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders had the energy of the people. Like, there was an absolute movement behind Bernie Sanders, and he was also not allowed to run. So when the Democrats control the process top down, they don't allow the manifestation of power from the bottom. And in our country, that's how it works. Like, or at least that's how it's worked so far, until and unless we end up in some kind of an authoritarian oligarchical control structure, which I think we've just demonstrated that we're not there yet. The power manifestation coming from the lowest levels is still what's happening, and I think that this is one of the reasons why the Democrats were caught off guard, because they were trying to control it top down, and it came up from the bottom and said, nope, we're going to reject what you've done here. And this is why when I saw that exit polling and I saw that word in there. And I know you don't like that word. You think it's a code for something else. But I think colloquially, if you ask the average person, they would say democracy means that I get to cast a vote and that I'm a participant in what's happening here. And when people are seeing that they don't have the ability to participate, it's a huge turnoff, because that's not America.
Well, I am incredibly wary of the word democracy because part of the understanding that we've taken away from democracy for and this is the result of intentional manipulation of our concepts of government that the United States State Department, blah, whatever we want to call it, the federal government has used in infecting the minds of various countries around the world so that we could proceed to politically take over them. So if our exercise of democracy, if we lay that expectation to be on voting, i- and voting in a for a legislative body, we're diluting our power by incredible amounts. And this focus on the legislation, um, it distracts us from other elements of very powerful control that we have. You know, we talk about votes all the time as if the only arm of government is the legislation, and yet we have the judiciary, which has become the parent of the executive and the legislative branch. Well, when we want to settle a question in the United States, we say, "Oh, let's get that up to the Supreme Court, and we'll have nine autonomous minds sit together and argue about it and issue a decision, and we're all going to abide by that." Look how that turned out with Roe v. Wade. Didn't turn out well. Didn't turn out well with Chevron either.
Yeah, I think that we're starting to absolutely see that your assertions that this is a political institution are 100% correct. And as you pointed out, historically, this is exactly what this body is. It's no different than any other human institution. Human institutions are dominated by biases and
And that's
political
not
alignments.
That's not bad, but we should be taking that idea. We've put all of our eggs in one basket, and that basket is the Supreme Court. We need to take those eggs back out and bring them down locally, and we need to, you know, it's amazing every time somebody says, "I voted," my response to them in real life is, "When was the last time you sat on a jury?"
That I'm glad we're going there. That this is where I had hoped the conversation would go, because when I'm watching these reaction videos and I'm seeing people expressing their discontent about what has happened, if you find that you are sitting under a bunch of laws that you don't like, you need to get on a jury and absolutely express your power as a juror, and potentially as a foreman of a jury, and start doing what you're being called to do as a juror, which is to decide whether this law is valid, because that's part of what you have to do as a juror. You have to decide if, like, what the legislature has passed is correct, and if you don't like the law, then void it right then and there.
And I think this is also important to know the histories of the party. Um, the Democrat Party has not always gone by the name of the Democrat Party. It used to be called the Democratic Republican Party, and it was started by Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson, in the arguments of the founders of the American Revolution and the framers of the United States Constitution, and those arguments, that some of the greatest disagreements were or discussions were about how we were going to have a judiciary system and what powers that judiciary system was going to have. And Thomas Jefferson believed in nullification. And the idea of nullification is one that has been silently removed from our concepts in America over generations, and to a point where uh, m- I mean, some states have even enshrined it in legislation that that a jury can't they can't ever come out and say, "Oh, a jury can't nullify something," but they say the advocates in the judicial system, the lawyers nor the judges can educate nor tell a jury about their happy powers. But juries have the greatest amount immunity. I someday in America we're going to read news headlines that say a jury called a judge into contempt. A jury began to understand the holy power that was granted to them and gotten us away from this notion that the democratic um, control or the democratic power in our society, in our system of government, was only through legislation. No, the most powerful point that we have is as acting as jurors. And there are different controls that go into juries. Another way that we have corrupted the power of juries is through the jury selection process, and that to me is disgusting. Why is the jury selection process not left to chance and empowering for a very short amount of time and in a very narrow focus, but giving the ultimate power to citizens? But regardless of what that selection process now looks like, once seated, those citizens still sit in the most powerful seats that exist in the United States, and those seats are not term limited, and they are not they are not for a 2, 4, or 6 year durations. They are for very short amounts of times with very short focus. But juries can consider not just the matters of fact, but also the appropriateness of legislation and whether that meets their understanding of what is the practice of their peers and whether that is or is not the law. And
Another thing that I've seen that's very insidiously starting to erode the idea of juries is the way that contracts are starting to be written now to eliminate jury from the ability to have that be a resolution path. The number of contracts that I've seen that have these clauses that say you're agreeing that you will not resolve this through a jury, but rather through an arbiter or a mediator. It's gotten almost out of control, especially with the way that we've got these click wrap EULAs and all kinds of other stuff that wrap around the top of services that people kind of want, but they're not willing to take the time to really read through the legal ramifications of what it is that they're signing away when they're agreeing to an agreement. And it's being written wholesale into so many contracts that say that you are expressly getting rid of any ability to have a resolution through a jury trial. It's getting almost out of hand.
that to me is um, contrary to the Seventh Amendment. And I don't understand how such contracts could stand up to the Seventh Amendment. And I do see an argument being made as to what the peers are for a contract. If you could argue about limiting um, the 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 random selection of the peers to people who have knowledge or standing in regards to the contract, but uh, to remove from the tools of the citizens of America the ability to have their agreements or civil disputes seen and judged by a jury of their peers. I, I think I think that's one of our most important amendments. We talk about the first and the second all the time, and the fourth and the fifth and the seventh to me are ones that deal with juries and our justice system and are equally, if not maybe more so, important. Um, because
I, I
we have
think I think I think one as simple as like the Disney Plus click wrapper is a good example that's actually come into the common understanding that there's something significantly wrong with this. Like you want to just watch streaming Disney, like that's something that a lot of people would arguably want to do. Like I don't know, whatever you kids want to watch cartoons, like that, there's nothing wrong there. But if you look through the details of what you're actually agreeing to when you click on that. It has broad reaching implications. And so far, the courts have found that there's nothing wrong with the contract that was established within that. One of the things that's in there is you waive the right to a jury trial, you waive all kinds of rights just by clicking on that Disney Plus rapper EULA, whatever. And that, I think, even if you were to think about who could possibly sit on the jury for some kind of a contract in that sense, I would say anybody who's ever had Disney Plus could easily sit on that jury. This one's an easy one. So I think it depends on the contract. If it's really esoteric and weird and very high level, like, yeah, maybe you'd have a problem finding a bunch of peers. But for a lot of stuff, these are just common things that people interact with. And so eliminating juries from these seem to be far outside the bounds of what anybody would consider to be reasonable.
If you think about flipping class action lawsuits, what we're sort of approaching or talking about sounds almost like taking the notion of class action lawsuits, and instead of them being just represented by a lawyer, an advocate in court, finding groups of these people who have standing or who think they've been wronged. I don't know how that works out. We're wandering into the weeds here. Going back to the elections, though, there's something else in the narrative and the takeaways from these elections that drives me a little bit crazy. And that's the narrative about the money that's spent on elections. And in 2016, when Donald Trump won, the prevailing narrative immediately afterwards was, well, I didn't think he was that serious. He didn't spend any money on it. Oh, he had all that free publicity. And I think that part of the focus that we have in the election process of the legislative branch has everything to do with political machines that make money off of those elections. And I see Democrats today who are both lamenting the fact that Kamala Harris's campaign is $20 million in the hole, questioning why they couldn't, answers to as to, why Bernie Sanders or Jill Stein didn't do better is, oh, they didn't raise enough money, or Jill Stein didn't raise as much money as Bernie Sanders. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that Americans vote based off of policies and policy agenda, and that's the most important thing that candidates can be changing or adopting in order to hit a wider spectrum of voters. But instead of having a buffet of choice when it comes to our legislative process, we're told, oh, you need to donate more money to somebody that you believe in, and just ignore the fact that the most important issue between the top candidates is that there's no divergence in the policy solutions that they're putting forth.
Well, I think that that's part of the problem, honestly. This idea that they want the little slice of power that you have, your vote, your money, but they don't want to give you a seat at the table. And I think that this was evident in the Democratic side of things when they were out there soliciting from Liz Cheney and a bunch of Republicans and whatever, and they wanted those endorsements. They wanted that little slice of power that they thought would come from, the Republicans that they were seeking endorsement from. But then I started looking, were those people invited to be a part of the team? Because on the Trump side, what I saw was the building of coalition, the building of a team that wanted to accomplish things. And there were a disparate set of voices, and there was an earnest interest in bringing those different viewpoints and synthesizing them into something that they wanted to mold into what would be the policy of that administration. I didn't see that happening on the other side. I saw they wanted those endorsements, they wanted the votes, they wanted the money, but they still wanted everything to be dictated from the top down. I say that the American people are going to continuously reject this kind of top down authoritarian control. And anytime it keeps looking like that's where failure is going to continue to exist in the political process.
Democrats need to when I look back at the election, I say Trump won on the tariff. Trump won on I'm going to get rid of the income tax. I'm going to stop taxes on tips. That is the real reason why Trump won, because we can also talk about dying federal issues like whatever it may be, but I think the greatest power that politicians also have are their policy solutions, not what they're going to kill, not what they're going to change, or what they're going to get rid of, but what they're going to do for someone. And saying, I am going to get rid of the income tax, I'm going to address the economy in such a way, that was a very powerful message. And the Democratic Party did not have it did not talking about adding a housing credit, but not addressing the wider issue of how we were going to um, make the distribution of wealth in America more fair was a turnoff to a lot of their voters. And this is where I think the Democrat needs to look back at its history and think about what happened uh, whenever America began to seek only federal solutions. Republicans are not the party of states' rights. They never have been. They're not to this day. Look at their solutions today. They have always been the party of citizens' rights so that they could subvert states' rights. And whenever they talk about states' rights, they're actually talking about the citizens in the several states and their rights. And how are they going to enforce them? They're going to enforce them through the DOJ. And the Democratic Party forgot that it was the Democratic Republics Party. It was Thomas and Jefferson's party about the rights of the individual republics, and they have begun to chase Republican power, the power of the republic, and in doing so, they gave away state power, and so their expectation that instead of having states fight for the individual sectors or the workers' rights in the disparate states, and that was going to be replaced by unions has not worked out for them, because what a state has that a union doesn't have is control over the people who live in a specific area. And whenever the Democratic Party turned from the reliance on the power of the state governments to uh, voluntary institutions like unions, um, you know, that's turned into their quote unquote identity politics. They were, also think back before the Republicans had picked up the big tent Republicans with the religious conservatives. The Democrats used to be the rural and the God fearing party, but those allegiances, these parties, that have to rely on the support of unions or churches or whatever it may be. You can have a union boss that says to the union workers, vote Democrat, and they did in this election, but the workers turned around and they voted Republican because the Republicans are saying, I'm going to have China, I'm going to have Europe pay for your life, and meanwhile, some Democrats say, well, how's that going to work out? That's going to kill trade. They're probably right, but it's a more appealing conversation than vote for union rights and then have all of those jobs dissipate across borders.
So we've actually seen more push towards having states get involved in a lot of the policy decisions, and that was spearheaded by some of the stuff that has been laid at the feet of Republicans. What are your thoughts there on even like what happened with Roe v. Wade? Roe v. Wade essentially, when it was struck down by the Supreme Court, returned it to the states, and that seemed to be a Republican initiative. I'm curious about your thoughts on that, given what you just said about the citizens' power, Republicans, and whatnot.
Well, if the Democrats, if members of the Democratic Republican Party are unsatisfied with the way that abortion is going, they should look into, where the wind is blowing, and instead of fighting for federal control, start fighting for breaking up the autonomy of state control. And saying, okay, like, Texas has restrictive abortion laws here. Why am I not fighting to get Travis County or Harris County or Tarrant County to say, we don't agree with that, and we should have local authority, and the people who live in our county should not have to abide by the same rules of people who live in rural West and North Texas. And if they were to look in that direction, they would find, I think that they will. They have to go in that direction, and they are going to find success, because it's not just Republicans nor Democrats that believe in local power. That is an American understanding, and something that has infected the world. Like, everyone wants to, um, the notion of centralized rule, I think, is dying. So, and when I look also back at what has happened, the Democrats, uh, or the left, or whatever we want to call it, have were chagrined at the Supreme Court's decision when it came to Chevron. But Chevron is going to be one of the most important decisions, because it has removed the power of the federal government to use to even subvert the judiciary, and to make their rules, to make their own rules in the executive branch. And so, as that fractures and their decisions are, I would say the way that it will go is their power will be stripped from them by the judiciary, and whether it be federal or local courts. So the again, Democrats should be looking to use the federal and, um, eh, state the state judicial systems, the appellate, whatever it may be, to make their own rules. I mean, we s- Democrats lament, the power that's stripped away from the EPA, but look at California. Does that mean anything to California? California has more restrictive laws when it comes to protecting the environment than the federal government. And so they should be looking at that model and saying, why, in what areas can we take local power and local authority, and enshrine the laws and the practices that we want to see.
And California has been very successful in this. Like, what California does, because the market is so large, it ends up pushing around a lot of what happens. Because if you lose access to that California market, it's a big deal, and so they can throw their weight around more, because they have a big market, they can make the rules, and so I think that has been a pretty successful model. And so, yeah, I think looking at what can be done at a state level, and then pushing around what you can do at a state level, can actually have a pretty significant impact in the broader in the broader political landscape.
Well, we're drawing to a close here. So to everyone, I would just say, take heart. Like, don't believe this narrative that, all of our hopes and dreams rely on an election that occurs every 4 years, because it changes a lot, but it doesn't change that much. And we have many other tools, in our democratic republics, that we can be using. And, we can certainly see change occur more quickly than once every 4 years. Um, I'm I'm already very interested to see the Republicans looking in retribution to use the Department of Justice to solve the issues of that were created with the use of the Department of Justice in in lawfare against Donald Trump. They're going to have to learn that if well, I don't know. That's a whole different. That's another conversation. Maybe not a whole
It
different.
it, it is, because I even was thinking as we were having this conversation, I want to talk about Germany. So we might have to tackle some more of these issues next week, because I don't think we're done talking about these kinds of things. And we're seeing it manifest. And we're actually seeing some of the election reactions resonating throughout the world as these ideas of tariffs and some of this other stuff is starting to be taken seriously by the rest of the world. There are starting to be reactions, political ramifications of this election being felt worldwide, and I think that there's a lot to actually talk about with respect to what's going to occur with the results of this election from a variety of different angles. So yeah, we probably don't want to open up too much given the fact that we're almost out of time here today, but I definitely look forward to having more in-depth conversations about these kinds of subjects, because I think there's a lot to unpack in what's occurred with this election, but there's also just like the broad narrative of how do you take power in your local life, and I think buying Bitcoin is another one of those. Just opting out of systems that you don't like these things have never really existed before, but they exist now, and to the extent that more and more people are starting to participate in this kind of stuff, it has meaning, and it does have ramifications.
The Republicans are also starting to grapple with the notion of how do they end the Fed, and
Ooh, that one's a juicy one, because you saw Powell come out and say Trump can't do it, and I think whenever you tell Trump that he can't do something, man, that's when he digs in his heels and he's like, "Oh, really? You think I can't do anything? Let's see what I can
well,
do."
yeah, the Republicans ought to remember the phrase "you break it, you bought it," and they ought also to be turning on that notion and saying, "Oh, we don't have control over you. We're not gonna back up the Federal Reserve. It is a why have we granted a monopoly to a private bank?" But oh, that's an even deeper conversation. But I want to have it sometime next week, and I think we might see. We might see a lot more dust that is stirred up around Republicans tossing around ideas about what it actually means to end something that they never actually controlled, or they never have admitted or been granted real control of. Whew.
Yeah, that'll be a fun one. The Jerome Powell comments that happened, I think, what was it, yesterday? Can't wait to dive into that in a bit more detail. But yeah, we're out of time here for today's FOMO. We'll catch you on Monday.
All right, see you next week.